The rope groaned a mournful tune in the biting wind, a dark pendulum against a sky swollen with snow clouds. Jackson Blackwood stood perfectly still on the wooden platform, his every breath a fleeting white cloud swallowed by the frigid Montana air. The coarse hemp of the noose, hanging loosely about his neck, chafed his skin with each sharp gust. Down below, the inhabitants of Redemption had assembled in the town square, their collars turned up high against the relentless cold, their faces grim shadows beneath the brims of bonnets and hats. There were no taunts, no celebrations, only the solemn hush of justice being dispensed in a land where mere survival was a hard-won prize. Sheriff Thomas Holt meticulously adjusted his gloves, his weathered face a mask of professional detachment, as he placed a hand on the lever that would release the trapdoor beneath Jackson's boots. Nearby, the editor of the local newspaper furiously scribbled notes with a worn-down pencil, dutifully documenting another frontier hanging for the upcoming weekly edition. "Jackson Blackwood," the sheriff's voice boomed, carrying across the silent square. "You have been found guilty of the crime of theft from the town stores and of resisting a lawful arrest. The penalty, as prescribed by territorial law, is death by hanging. Do you have any final words?" Jackson's gaze remained fixed on the distant mountains, their formidable peaks vanishing into the embrace of the low-hanging clouds. Somewhere high up on those slopes, nestled in a cave warmed by a meager fire, his sons were waiting. Matthew and Daniel, 8 and 6 years old, were waiting for a father who was never coming home. "I have nothing to say," Jackson responded, his voice a low growl, yet unwavering. "Let's get this over with." Sheriff Holt gave a curt nod, his grip tightening on the wooden lever. The crowd instinctively surged forward, a bombishkit, collective human impulse to bear witness to the precise moment life is extinguished. "Stop!" The cry sliced through the thick silence like a woodsman's axe splitting a log. Heads swiveled in unison. The crowd parted as a woman forced her way to the front, her dark cloak a stark contrast against the snow-blanketed ground. Eleanor Hayes moved with a fierce determination, despite being heavily pregnant. One hand was braced against her swollen abdomen for support, while the other clutched a folded piece of paper. Her face, framed by wisps of auburn hair escaping her bonnet, showed no trace of fear or hesitation, only an unyielding resolve. "You cannot hang this man," she announced, her voice ringing with authority as she reached the foot of the gallows, her breath coming in ragged bursts from the effort. Sheriff Holt's hand stayed on the lever, but a deep furrow creased his brow. "Ma'am, this is a lawful execution. I must ask you to step back." Eleanor drew herself up, wincing slightly. "I invoke the Frontier Labor Act of 1871. She held the document aloft. "This man can serve his sentence through indentured servitude rather than execution." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Jackson's focus finally broke from the mountains, his eyes locking onto Eleanor's, a storm of confusion and the first faint flicker of hope swirling within them. "That law is intended for debtors, ma'am, not for thieves," Sheriff Holt countered, though a note of uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Section 4, paragraph 3, Eleanor's voice was steady and clear, "extends the provision to non-violent criminals during times of territorial necessity. I have a homestead 7 miles from here. My husband passed away 3 months ago. I'm due to give birth any day, with no one to assist me or to maintain the property." She took a step forward, extending the document toward the sheriff. "I have the magistrate's seal from Pine Creek. This is legal and binding." The sheriff reluctantly descended the steps of the platform, taking the document from her with a skeptical scowl. He read it slowly, his lips moving almost imperceptibly, before he looked up, his displeasure evident. "It appears to be in order," he conceded with a begrudging tone. "Then remove the noose from his neck," Eleanor commanded. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Jackson was unbound and the noose was lifted from his shoulders. When his boots finally touched the packed earth of the town square, His legs almost gave way beneath him. Eleanor approached, her voice low enough for only him to hear. "If you try to run, they will hunt you down and hang you without a second thought. Your only chance for survival is to come with me." Jackson scrutinized her face, searching for any hint of deception or a hidden agenda. Finding nothing but sincerity, he gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "Mrs. Hayes," Sheriff Holt said, handing the document back to her. "He is your responsibility now. If he causes any trouble, it will fall on your head." Eleanor took the paper, tucking it securely inside her cloak. "I understand completely." As they walked away from the gallows, the crowd parted for them in silence. Jackson could feel their stares like a physical weight on his back. He had been prepared to die. Now, he found himself trailing a pregnant stranger toward a future he could not begin to imagine. Neither of them spoke until they reached a small wagon at the edge of town. Eleanor clambered awkwardly onto the driver's bench, gathering the reins of a weary-looking bay mare. "Get in," she said, her eyes fixed forward. Jackson hesitated for only a heartbeat before climbing up beside her. The wagon lurched forward, leaving the town of Redemption behind them. 1 week earlier, Jackson had stood at the edge of the forest, watching his breath crystallize in the glacial air. The mountains surrounded him, their familiar, silent slopes offering no solace this time. He had poured 3 years into building a life here after his wife, Sarah, had died, trapping, hunting, and teaching his sons the harsh lessons of survival in this unforgiving wilderness. But the winter had descended early and lingered with a cruel tenacity. The game had grown scarce, and then it had disappeared entirely. Their cache of dried meat and preserved berries had shrunk to almost nothing. 3 days had passed since any of them had consumed more than a meager handful of pine nuts and melted snow. Inside their small, rough-hewn cabin, Matthew and Daniel slept, their faces thin and pallid in the dim light. Jackson had kept watch over them through the night, listening to their breathing become shallow, feeling their foreheads for any sign of fever. By the time morning broke, he knew there was no other choice. "Boys," he said, his voice soft as he knelt beside their shared cot, "we have to move." Matthew, who was already too much like his father in too many ways, understood instantly. At 8 years old, he had seen enough hardship to recognize the gravity in his father's tone. "The cave?" Jackson nodded. "Pack only what you absolutely need. We leave within the hour." The cave was situated 3 miles up the mountain, a place they had previously used for storage and as an emergency shelter. It was not much, a narrow fissure that opened into a space just large enough for 3 people, but it possessed a natural flue that would allow for a small fire without the risk of suffocation. "Are we in trouble, Pa?" Daniel asked, his small voice tight with fear. Jackson pulled his younger son into a hug, feeling the boy's ribs sharply through his worn shirt. "No, son. We're just being smart. The hunting might be better higher up." It was a lie, and the look in Matthew's eyes told Jackson that his older son knew it. But Daniel, with the simple faith of a 6-year-old who still believed his father could fix anything, nodded. By midday, Jackson had the boys settled in the cave with the last of their supplies, a small sack of pine nuts, 2 strips of jerky he had been hoarding, and a set of clear instructions. "Matthew, you're in charge until I get back. Keep the fire small. Do not leave this cave for any reason." "Where are you going?" Matthew asked, his young face already bearing a weight of responsibility far too heavy for his years. Jackson checked the knife at his belt. His rifle had been bartered months ago for flour and salt. "Down to the town. I'm going to bring back food." "The town doesn't like us," Matthew stated quietly, recalling their last attempt to trade there. "They don't have to like us," Jackson replied, ruffling his son's hair with a rough affection. "I'll be back before the moon is full, 2 days at most. You know what to do if I'm not back by then?" Matthew nodded solemnly. "Head east, to the Wilson homestead." "That's right. Old Mrs. Wilson has a soft spot for children. even for mountain children. Jackson embraced both his boys, holding them tighter and for longer than usual, committing the feeling of them in his arms to memory. "I'll be back before you know it." He could feel Matthew's eyes on his back as he departed from the cave, the boy's unspoken understanding hanging in the frigid air between them. At just 8 years old, Matthew already knew that the world could take without warning and without mercy. He had learned that terrible lesson when his mother died, bringing Daniel into the world. As Jackson made his way down the mountain, each step carrying him farther from his sons, memories of Sarah washed over him like the bitter wind. Her laughter, her hands always busy with some task, her fierce, unwavering love for Matthew and the child they had been anticipating. He had been a different man then. Dr. Nathan Blackwood, recently returned from the war, building a medical practice in a small Illinois town. The war had changed him, as it had every man who had lived through its horrors. He had seen too much death, sewn up too many bodies torn apart by cannon fire and bullets. But he had still believed in the power of healing, in the promise of a fresh start. Sarah had been his anchor, his reason to believe in the possibility of tomorrow. Then came that night, the night that had sent him fleeing westward with a new name and a newborn son. The night Maxwell Reynolds' son had broken into their home, desperate for the morphine needed to feed an addiction born in the battlefield hospitals. The ensuing struggle, the glint of the knife, the terrible, sickening realization as the young man's life bled out onto their kitchen floor. Reynolds had been a judge, a powerful man whose profound grief quickly curdled into a relentless thirst for vengeance. The charges were unequivocal: murder. There was no consideration for self-defense, for the act of protecting a pregnant wife. Jackson had taken Daniel, who was barely a day old, collected Matthew from a neighbor's house, and vanished into the darkness of the night. 3 years of running, of surviving, of carving out something that resembled a life in these mountains. 3 years of constantly looking over his shoulder, of teaching his boys to be wary of every stranger. 3 years that had culminated in this desperate journey down the mountain, toward a town that regarded mountain folk with suspicion at best and outright hostility at worst. Jackson reached the outskirts of Redemption as dusk began to settle over the valley. The town was small, comprised of a church, a saloon, a general store, and a scattering of houses. Lanterns were being lit, casting warm, yellow rectangles onto the snow-dusted main street. He kept to the shadows, watching, waiting. The storeroom behind Jameson's General S. Tor was not difficult to locate, nor was it particularly well secured. A simple padlock yielded to the tip of his knife with minimal effort. Inside, the shelves lined with goods made his mouth water: sacks of flour and beans, jars of preserved fruits, and slabs of salt pork. Jackson took only what was essential for their survival: a small sack of flour, some beans, a jar of molasses, and a bag of dried apples. He wrapped them tightly in his coat, securing the bundle with a length of rope he found. It would be enough to keep the boys alive until the spring thaw brought fresh game. He was nearly clear of the town when a voice shouted out from behind him, "You there! Stop!" Jackson broke into a run, his boots slipping on the ice-slick streets, the precious bundle clutched tightly to his chest. Behind him, the shouts grew louder. A shot rang out, the bullet splintering wood somewhere off to his right. He might have made it if not for a patch of black ice near the livery stable. His feet went out from under him, sending him crashing to the ground. The precious bundle of food skidded away across the frozen earth. Before he could scramble back to his feet, rough hands seized him, forcing his face down into the snow. "Got him, Sheriff!" a voice called out triumphantly. "Caught ourselves a mountain thief!" Jackson stopped struggling, knowing it was useless. Above him, faces materialized in the flickering lantern light: the sheriff, the store owner, and several townsfolk drawn by the commotion. "Well, well," Sheriff Holt said, peering down at him. "What have we here? A thief in the night?" "My children are starving," Jackson choked out, the words torn from him by raw desperation. "I only took what we needed to survive." The sheriff's expression hardened. "Should have thought of that before you decided to set up in those mountains, away from decent folk. The law is the law." As they dragged him toward the jailhouse, Jackson's thoughts were not on his own fate, but on Matthew and Daniel, waiting in that cold, dark cave, watching the days pass, waiting for a father who was not coming back. Eleanor Hayes winced as the wagon wheel hit another deep rut in the frozen road. Beside her, Jackson Blackwood sat in silence, his face a mask of stoic endurance. They had departed from Redemption 3 hours ago, and he had spoken barely a dozen words in that time. "We'll reach my place before nightfall," she said, breaking the long silence. "It's not much, but it's solid. My husband built it well." Jackson glanced at her, then his eyes returned to the road ahead. "Why did you do it?" Eleanor kept her gaze fixed on the path, adjusting her grip on the reins. "I told you, I need help. You need to not be hanged." She paused. It seemed like a fair arrangement. "There are other men in town, men without theft charges, men who know how to farm. And not a single one of them would venture out to a widow's place 7 miles from town with a baby due any day and winter not yet broken," she stated flatly. She gave him a sidelong glance. "Besides, I've heard things about you. The mountain man with 2 children. A man like that knows how to survive." Jackson stiffened. "What else have you heard?" "That your wife died. That you keep to yourself. That before you came to these parts, you were someone else entirely." Eleanor expertly guided the horse around a large fallen branch. "But then, most of the people who come out west are running from something." The tension in Jackson's shoulders did not ease. "My sons are up in the mountains, in a cave near Pine Ridge. They have very little food left." Eleanor nodded, as if she had expected this news. "We will get them." "Not today. I'm too tired. And this little one is making her presence known," she said, rubbing her belly. "But tomorrow, if the weather holds, I can go tonight, bring them back by morning. And leave me here all alone, 9 months pregnant, just but after I saved you from the gallows." Eleanor shook her head. "I may be desperate, Mr. Blackwood, but I am not a fool. You will stay tonight. You will help me with the evening chores, and we will go and fetch your boys tomorrow." Jackson fell silent once again, his jaw working with the unspoken arguments he was holding back. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "One night," he agreed. "Then I will bring my boys down." As the wagon crested a small rise in the landscape, Eleanor's homestead came into view. It consisted of a cabin built of sturdy logs, a barn to one side, a chicken coop, and a small fenced area that might have been a garden in the warmer months. A thin plume of smoke rose from the chimney. Someone was there. Jackson tensed, his hand instinctively going to his side where a weapon would normally have been. "It's all right," Eleanor said, noticing his reaction. "That will be Ezekiel Reed, the preacher from town. He checks on me when he can." Indeed, as they pulled up to the cabin, the door opened to reveal a tall, lean man dressed in a black coat. His beard was streaked with grey, and he clutched a Bible in one hand. "Mrs. Hayes," he called, stepping out onto the porch. "I was growing concerned." He stopped abruptly when he saw Jackson. "I see you went through with it." Eleanor climbed down from the wagon with some difficulty, accepting the preacher's offered hand. "As we discussed, yes." Reed's eyes never left Jackson's face. There was something in that gaze that went beyond mere weariness, a flash of recognition that was quickly masked. "Mr. Blackwood," Reed said carefully, "I trust you understand the opportunity that you've been given today." Jackson stepped down from the wagon, his movements stiff and deliberate. "I do." "Good." Reed turned his attention back to Eleanor. "I've stoked the fire and put a pot of stew on. It's not much, I'm afraid. Just some root vegetables and a little bit of salt pork." "That's more than enough, Ezekiel. Thank you." Eleanor moved toward the cabin, one hand supporting Tal. He small of her back. Mr. Blackwood will help me with the rest of the evening chores. Reed hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave. I could stay the night. Sleep in the barn. There's no need, Eleanor replied firmly. Mr. Blackwood is well aware of what's at stake if he were to disappoint me. The preacher looked from one to the other, then nodded slowly. Very well. I will return in a few days to check on you. As Reed mounted his horse and rode away, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that the man had recognized him, truly recognized him, beyond the reputation of a mountain man he had acquired in these parts. The inside of the cabin was simple but well constructed. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking pot hanging over the flames that cast dancing shadows across the planked floor. There was a table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair near the fire, and a curtained-off area that presumably held a bed. Everything was neat and orderly, but with telltale signs of neglect. A thin layer of dust on the shelves, cobwebs in the corners. Sit, Eleanor said, gesturing toward the table. You look half-starved. Jackson remained standing. I need to tend to your horse first. Eleanor studied him for a moment and then nodded. The barn is fully stocked. Hay in the loft, grain in the bin by the door. The water pump on the south side might need priming if it has frozen. When Jackson returned half an hour later, the stew was bubbling, filling the small cabin with a savory aroma that made his stomach clench painfully. He had cared for the horse, checked the chicken coop, and brought in an armful of firewood, basic chores that felt strangely foreign after 3 years of mountain living. Eleanor sat in the rocking chair, one hand resting absently on her belly. She had removed her cloak and bonnet, revealing a simple blue dress stretched taut over her pregnant form, and her auburn hair was pinned up in a practical bun, though several strands had escaped to frame a face that looked exhausted beyond its years. You have questions, she stated, as he closed the door behind him. As do I. But first, we eat. The stew was simple. Turnips, carrots, potatoes, and small pieces of salt pork, but to Jackson it was a feast. He ate slowly, forcing himself not to bolt down the food, despite his ravenous hunger. Your boys, Eleanor said after they had eaten in silence for several minutes. How old are they? Matthew is 8. Daniel is 6. And their mother? Jackson's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. She died when Daniel was born. Eleanor nodded, her hand moving to her belly again. I'm sorry. They finished the rest of their meal in silence. Afterward, Jackson insisted on washing the dishes while Eleanor rested by the fire. There's a pallet in the storage room, she said, nodding toward a door off the main room. Blankets are in the chest. It's not much, but it's warmer than a jail cell. Or a noose, Jackson added quietly. A small, tired smile touched Eleanor's lips. Indeed. Later, as Jackson lay on the pallet in the small, chilly storeroom, listening to the wind howl outside, his thoughts turned once more to his sons. Were they warm enough? Had they rationed the food as he had instructed? Was Matthew keeping the fire small as he had been taught? He considered slipping away into the night, taking the horse and riding up to the cave, bringing the boys back here before dawn. But something held him back. Perhaps it was the debt he now owed to this woman. Perhaps it was the knowledge that she was right. She needed his help, and soon. Sleep came eventually, but it was troubled by dreams of rope and gallows, of small, cold bodies lying still in a mountain cave, of Sarah's face as she slipped away, and of blood pooling on a kitchen floor in Illinois. Eleanor sat alone at the table, long after Jackson had retired to the storeroom. Her back ached, and the baby kicked restlessly at her ribs. She reached for the small wooden box she kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard near the hearth. Inside lay a collection of letters, carefully preserved. She withdrew one, unfolding the creased paper with practiced care, though she knew the words by heart. My dearest Eleanor, the hospital is overrun again. So many boys, so young, with wounds that defy description. I thank God daily for your steady hands beside mine as we work. Today, I assisted Dr. Blackwood with a particularly difficult case. A young soldier with a chest wound that would have been fatal in less capable hands. Dr. Blackwood is a marvel to watch. While other surgeons rush through their procedures, concerned only with quantity, he takes such care with each patient, seeing them as men rather than merely bodies to be mended. I believe I am learning more from him than from all my medical texts combined. When this war finally ends, I hope to emulate his approach in my own civilian practice, to remember that healing requires not just skill, but humanity. Eleanor carefully refolded the letter, one of many her husband James had written during their time serving in a field hospital during the war. James Hayes had been a medical assistant, eager to learn and passionate about the art of healing. Eleanor had been a nurse, one of many women who had left their homes to tend to the wounded and the dying. And Nathan Blackwood, now calling himself Jackson, had been one of the most skilled surgeons in the entire Union Army. She had recognized him immediately when they brought him to the gallows. Though years of hardship had carved new lines in his face and turned his hair grey at the temples, she had known him. It had been Ezekiel Reed's suggestion to invoke the labor law when she had confided her recognition to him days earlier. A doctor, he had mused. Even one in hiding would be a godsend in these parts. Eleanor returned the letter to its box, wincing as a contraction tightened across her belly. It was not labor yet, just practice, as her mother would have called it. Still, she knew her time was drawing near. She placed a hand over the spot where her child kicked. "Your father would have liked him," she whispered. "A good man in terrible circumstances." Eleanor had not told Jackson that she knew who he truly was. Not yet. There would be time for that after his sons were safe, after the baby came, after a foundation of trust had been established. For now, it was enough that he was here, that he would help her through what was to come. She made her way to bed, moving carefully in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring its own set of challenges. For tonight, at least, neither of them was alone.